I welcome you all to the daily newspaper analysis, an initiative of the UPSConline.com and Ambition IAS. Today we shall be discussing the newspaper of the 15th of December 2017. So coming to the first article. This is an article on the editorial page of the Hindu. Looking for balance in power. Now this article is about the Russia-India-China's 15th trilateral meet, which was held in New Delhi recently. So this is the context of this entire editorial. Coming firstly to the background. Now one issue with this article is if you're going to read this article, you're going to realize that the article is a good article but a difficult one to comprehend because it is not in a very schematic manner. So for this reason, I have made the entire article a bit divided into a particular flow. So that is how I'm going to discuss the article. So coming firstly to the background of the RIC itself. Now this is a trilateral group, and the idea for this group was first mooted out in the year 1998 by the then Russian Prime Minister Mr. Yevgeny Primakov during his visit to India. And the idea was that this kind of a trilateral partnership will result in greater regional and international stability. But at that point of time, the three countries did not take this very idea very much seriously because that time the circumstances were different. However, in the year 2002, in the aftermath of the US, the attack on the Twin Towers on US had taken a very strong stand against Afghanistan and some of Asian countries. So in this backdrop, all the three countries, that is Russia, India and China, collectively felt that they need to take a united stand to prevent, or if not prevent, but rather diffuse the unilateral power of US in their neighborhood. So it was primarily for this reason that at that point of time, on the sidelines of the United Nations General Council meeting, the first ministerial meet took place. So the birth was in 2002, and since then every year a meeting has been held between the foreign ministers of the respective countries, and this was the 15th trilateral meet. Now coming to the backdrop of this meet. Now the first backdrop is that the meet has happened after the Quad. Now, first and foremost, you should know what is the Quad. The Quad is an agreement between four nations, that is India, the US, Australia, and Japan. Now, this is an understanding between these four nations to cooperate on the matters related to Indian Ocean, Asia Pacific relationships, and this kind of a partnership, and this is basically a military agreement for protection of seas also. Now this agreement has been largely looked down upon by Russia and US, as they consider that this is a result of India's warming up with US, and initially when India was reluctant to join the Quad, but somehow now it has joined the Quad. So it has the meeting, the RIC meet has happened right after the Quad. Another backdrop is like this backdrop has been explained in the article itself, and it enumerates a few of the international issues which are ongoing. So these are some important issues. Firstly, the political scenario in West Asia and North Africa. Secondly, challenges of putting world economy back on growth track. Furthermore, international terrorism, transnational organized crime, illicit drug trafficking, food security, and climate change. Now, whenever you get an opportunity of collecting such kind of issues from editorials, you must always grab that opportunity, because this is a summary of all the issues that are going on and provides you an opportunity to apply them in some different context, in some different article. So whenever you're supposed to enumerate, or you need to mention some of the international issues, this is a gist of it, these 7 issues that I have mentioned. Now coming next to the challenges. The challenges are many. First and foremost, Russia and China's discomfort with Quad that I have explained. Now, there are some key words that the article uses. These include sentences like closed block arrangements. Now, China and Russia have discarded the idea of closed block arrangements and they have called for democratization of international relations. Now, the article has given some good keywords, so you can make a note of them. And these can be used time and again in different answers. Another challenge is that of the One Belt, One Road. Now, you all know that India has not officially joined the One Belt, One Road. Rather, India has opposed the idea of One Belt, One Road as something, marring the sovereignty of other nations. So, India has not adopted the OBOR, but Russia is an integral part of OBOR with China. And not only that, Russia has time and again insinuated and even openly for that matter asked India to join OBOR and has told India to set aside these doubts on China. So that is one thing that you should know, that Russia and China on matter of OBOR are united and our views differ from the views of Russia and China. So that is one challenging issue. Now coming to the next issue is that of Doklam. Now, in the Doklam standoff between India and China, the foreign minister of China has made statements under this RIC meet that India had backed down, India had transgressed into Chinese territory. So these kind of statements are unwelcome for India. Also, the author has given a good opinion which you can note down for usage in some other articles, also in articles related to India-China, specific Indo-China, Sino-Indian relations. There this becomes important. The opinion is that India and China have far more common shared strategic interests than differences. So this is a good opinion which can be used in various answers. Now, another challenging issue is that of Russia's discomfort with warming relations of India and US. This is also important from India-Russia relationship. And if you want to go into the details of India-Russia relationship, you can refer to the video on the 11th of December. There, this topic has been dealt with in detail. Now, coming to the next issue is that of Russia-China closeness to check US expansion. Now, Russia and China have largely been colluding with each other to check expansionist tendencies of US. China is emerging as a superpower and Russia has been waning as a superpower. So this is a complex sort of a relationship which is largely because both countries are wary of US and want to check the power balance. And this is not very much to the liking of India. So this is one issue that is important here. Now coming to the next issue of India's interests. First and foremost, the first interest for India is that the opportunity to balance power as a unipolar US dominated world is also not in India's interest. Now you have seen that despite India's warmth with US, India does have issues also with the US. Suppose in the very recent WTO meet, we can see that India and US are leaders of opposite groups altogether, and US is largely a capitalistic country, and though India has adopted economic reforms, India's bent is towards socialism. So this is a very contending issue between India and US, and India has never welcomed a unipolar world. So in this regard, meeting with Russia and China and balancing the global powers is in India's interest. Now, one thing you have to understand, that wherever you are discussing international relations, this term multilateralism is very important. And this is some idea that you should not miss out now. The world is no more about power centers. Rather, it's a multilateral world and there are multiple power centers. So for India, it is very important to become a power center and to engage with other power centers. So that is one opinion that can be discussed in this article. Another benefit for India is that alternate forums for discussion to diffuse tension, like with China, the tensions over Doklam issue, also some issues with Russia, because Russia is militarily engaging with Pakistan. That is one irritant for India now. So these kind of forums provide alternate association podiums for India. So also then changing with engaging with multiple partners so as to limit bilateral divergences. This is the same point that I had discussed. Now, one thing in this article that has been given is something very important. The opinion in this article is important, and I would suggest that you should note it down. The opinion is that India is today confident of setting its own agenda in various platforms. Just as China is engaging with both US and Russia, India is capable of balancing ties with the US, Russia, and China. Now, this is important because in the past, India has had complex foreign relations where India's bent was towards one country. Though India has been a champion of the non-alignment movement, but in practice, India was more close to Russia. Now, in the modern world, India has changed its foreign policy as India is not only engaging with one country, but rather India is capable of engaging with two belligerent countries. For instance, India has a warming with the US, and similarly, India is also having a balanced relationship with Russia. This is the complex diplomacy that India is now pursuing. And India is just like China. China is also engaging with both US as well as Russia. So why not India? India can also engage with countries who are independently not comfortable with each other. So why shouldn't India not be a part of Quad as well as RIC? Of course, India is confident. India is very much capable now to engage with both the Quad as well as the RIC, and it is balancing both these meets well and confidently. So that is a good opinion, and it can be used in other articles as well. So coming to the next article, this is an article on disaster management. In fact, it is not precisely an article on disaster management because it doesn't discuss India's policies on disaster management. So this article, I suggest you should discuss it as a case study. This is a case study on disaster management in India. Now, coming to the first part, that is a definition. The article provides a good definition of what is a disaster. This is also the official definition adopted by the National Disaster Management Authority. So I'll read out the definition once. A disaster is an event causing extreme disruption in a society's functioning, resulting in widespread human, material, and environmental losses, which are beyond the ability of the affected people to cope with on their own. So this is the definition, and this can be used wherever opportunity provide. Coming next to the background slightly, you should know that what all are the institutions for disaster. Though I will not be discussing them in detail, but I'll just be enumerating them. You all know that in 2005, there was a National Disaster Management Act. Then there's a national policy on disaster management that was laid down in 2009. Then in 2015, there was a Sendai framework, which is the global level framework and global agreement on disaster preparedness, which was held in India. This was important. Next, in 2016, recently, we've had a National Disaster Management Plan. So this is the background. Now, coming to the application and the issues, now what has basically happened is that you all know that there was an Okchi cyclone which has hit the states of Tamil Nadu and Kerala. And precisely the Kanyakumari district in Tamil Nadu has been the worst hit by this cyclone. Now, in the aftermath of the cyclone, an analysis has been drawn as to what was the efficacy of the disaster management forces. Now, this is not an official document or an official report or an official study, but rather a media reported article. So some of these ideas you can use, but you should not use them very aggressively, because this is not a government report. So you should use them, but cautiously. So coming first and foremost to the first issue is that of warning. Now, according to media reports, the warning that was issued for the Okchi cyclone was not in tune with the understanding of the local conditions. Now, this is also an example of an ivory tower approach. This can be used there. This is a good example in such a scenario. Why? Because there may be a provision under the Act that a warning has to be issued timely. But the idea of issuing warning is far away from the idea from the understanding of the fishermen there. Now, the fishermen there leave for fishing about in some cases 10 days to 1 month. a time period. So even if you have issued a warning 24 hours or 48 hours before, it is of no use, because the authorities are not versed with the idea that when are the fishermen leaving for fishing. So the warning should have been issued in such a manner that it should have been in line with the ground reality. So the ground reality has been missed in this case. This is one issue. The second issue is that of action. Now there have been various people who have been claiming that the action should have been at war footing. So this was missing in this entire case. That is one issue. Mobilization and action was slow. Another issue is that of participation. Now, this is a very, very important issue. See, the National Disaster Management Authority has laid down a national policy on disaster management. And even the last year National Disaster Management Plan has laid down for people's participation and people-centric, decentralized disaster management. All these terms are very, very important. But what has happened in this case is that participation of the people has been minimal. The authorities have not sought the participation of people, which was crucial. Why? Because in this scenario, the people affected were the fishermen, and these fishermen were out in the seas. Now, whenever the rescue teams were leaving, they should have taken the fishermen who were available, so that these fishermen could guide the rescue teams as to what are the fishing hotspots for fishermen, which the fishermen were well versed with and the authorities were not well versed with. But in practice, this has not happened, and this has led to wastage of resources, loss of precious lives of fishermen, and wastage of the time. The crucial time, the initial crucial time of disaster response has been missed. So this is a very, very important point which the case study brings about. Another thing is that of Coast Guard's jurisdiction. Now, this is the point where I was mentioning that you have to be a little cautious. Now, here there are reports by the fishermen and some media reports where the fishermen who did participate, who did go with the Coast Guards, they have claimed that the Coast Guards were reluctant to go beyond a particular distance, in this case 60 nautical miles, on the grounds that they were not allowed, that it was outside their jurisdiction. Now, this is somehow an example which can be used in case of ethics, because in ethics a number of times questions are being asked about rules versus what is right as per rules and what is right as per ethics. So in that regard, this is a good example, though you need not be very specific as to using terms like the Coast Guards and all, but you can simply use that in disaster response teams. Such cases have come forward where the teams have restricted themselves to the jurisdiction despite going ahead. See, when the issue is about saving somebody's life, at that point of time, you cannot limit yourself to distance and jurisdictions. That is something that is ethically incorrect. So this is a good example here. Another issue that is very, very important in this case study is that of coordination. This can be, you can have a question where you have to criticize the disaster protocol in India. So this is a very, very important point there, that coordination issues. See, Indian Navy should have come into prompt action. Indian Navy is highly capable, it is highly advanced as compared to the disaster relief response forces. So the Indian Navy has been slow in action. Why? Because there was an improper coordination. So this is a good example. Also, with regard to relief and rehabilitation, coordination is the issue even in relief and rehabilitation. Now, not only lives have been lost, crops have been destroyed, rubber crops have been destroyed, spice crops have been destroyed, cattle has been lost. So the issue is that of cooperation between the center and state, and between different departments like the agricultural department, the horticulture department, the animal husbandry department, the fisheries department, the rubber board, the coconut board, the spice board. So this is a good analysis that this article has drawn, and it has to be applied in this manner. Now, the last point, that is though this is not enumerated very explicitly in the article, but it is implicit. The idea is that the fishermen were deep into the sea. The idea of deep fishing, that is why they were out for 10 days and 1 month, because fishing is not happening right at the coast, it is happening at deep sea. Why? Because there is an environmental degradation of India's seas, and that is why the fishermen are now being forced to resort to deep sea fishing. This is an issue that has even been raised by the Sri Lankan government with regard to trawlers that are being used by India. So this is a example. If there is an opportunity where you are supposed to discuss that what are the environmental impacts of deep sea fishing, or deterioration of fishing grounds for India, there you can bring out this good analysis that how this even makes the fishermen more vulnerable. Not only is it an environmental loss, it is also making the fishermen more vulnerable, as was seen in the case of Okchi disaster. So this is about the application and the issues of this case study. Coming to the next article. Now, firstly, talking about this article itself. Now, time and again, you're going to find articles related to the economy, because every quarter new figures come up for the economy. Now, in such a scenario, you should focus upon the trends more than the figure. Especially this is for the freshers. Now, freshers, the students who are just beginning to prepare, they have a tendency to get lost in these minor some of these figures and minor details. Those are not important for UPSC. What is important is that you should know the trend, whether it is, if even with regards to GDP, you should know that whether it is rising or it is falling. That is the trend. Even if you do not remember the quarter figures, it is okay, it is not very much required. So in this discussion also, I'll not be discussing these details. In case any one of you is interested, of course you can refer to the article, but I shall be discussing the broader points of the economy that have been discussed in this article. Now, first and foremost, what are the good signals of economy that the article mentions? Firstly, there has been an upgrade of sovereign rating by global agencies. That is something good for the Indian economy. Secondly, there's a sharp improvement in India's rank on the World Bank's Index of Ease of Doing Business. This is a good sign for the economy. Also, there's a growth of 6.3% in the second quarter of this year. That is some of the good signals. But the article is basically focusing on this part. See, the opinion is that with price rising and manufacturing slowing, the economy is still not out of the woods. So that means the issue is about the risks that the economy is facing. So the first concern is that of rising oil prices. Now, we all know that for the longest period, this government, the Modi government, has had the benefit of a comfortable oil price. This was not the benefit that the previous government enjoyed, because in the previous government, oil prices had zoomed to unproportional levels, and that was some of the biggest strains on economy for the previous government. But this government somehow has benefited from the low rates of oil globally, but these oil prices are bound to rise again. So that is a threat for the economy. Another issue is that the manufacturing sector is overall slowing. So in some parts, initially the article mentions that somewhere manufacturing is growing, but overall picture is that manufacturing sector is slowing. The index of industrial production growth has reflected that the growth is 2.5% compared to the 5.5% in the same period last year. You need not remember the figures, but you should know that manufacturing sector is overall slowing. Another point is that of weak exports. The export sector is weakened. Then you have to understand the job creation in India has been very, very slow, and rising levels of unemployment is a pressing issue for the government. Now, another concern is that of inflation. Inflation in the country is rising, especially the core inflation. This has been mentioned in the article, the core inflation. Now, core inflation is the inflation that excludes food and fuel. So that has been on the rise. Also, there is a tendency of importing inflation. Importing inflation means that whenever there is inflation globally and the imports of the country are high, there is a tendency to import that inflation from other countries into one's own country. So this is the idea of imported inflation, which the author is saying that is going to happen at the behest of rising oil prices again. Now, once inflation happens, you have to understand the monetary policy of the RBI is dependent on only one criteria, that is inflation. So if inflation rises, then the monetary policy will not be in alignment with the desires of the government, and they will be having constraints on lowering the interest rates, and as a result of which, again, market will become slow. So this is what is important in this article. These are the trends that are important in this article. Now, coming to the next article. Yeah. This is an article on Brexit. Now, first and foremost, what is the context of this article? Now, recently, firstly, we all know that there was a referendum in Britain, and in the referendum, the people of United Kingdom have voted to exit the European Union, and this movement is known as the Brexit. Now, what is the context is what has happened recently. Now, recently, what has happened is that the government of UK under the Prime Minister May Theresa, is supposed to sign on and deliberate upon the agreements which it is supposed to sign with the European Union. Now, the Parliament in UK has voted against these agreements and has upheld the supremacy of the Parliament. Not only that, even MPs from the Conservative Party itself, the ruling party itself, have voted against the decision of the Prime Minister and have upheld the supremacy of the Parliament in deciding the agreements that are to be held with the European Union. So that is the whole context of this article. You need not go into very much of details because political matters of other countries are not very important from UPSC point of view. But yes, certain trends you must understand. Now, coming to the issues that are important, the first issue is that of parliamentary sovereignty versus executive prerogative. As I said, that the parliamentarians have, in this case, have maintained that parliamentary checks on agreements to be signed with the European Union should be maintained. In such a case, the executive has become evidently much more accountable to the Parliament. Even the judiciary has supported Parliament's stand in this regard, and many of the MPs have a softer corner for the European Union, and so they want better terms of agreement with the European Union. So that is the issue. This is important for India also because India is itself a parliamentary form of government, and you may have an opportunity to discuss this topic of parliamentary sovereignty versus the executive prerogative even in India, because the executive in India is very strong at this moment because of the majority that they're enjoying in the parliament. So that can be an issue. So in such a scenario, you can draw some parallels or draw some comparisons with other governments, and UK being one of them. So that is why this becomes of importance to India. Another thing is that of relations with European Union. Like I mentioned, that some of these MPs have a warmth towards European Union. So deciding upon what relations they are going to have with European Union has become important for UK, especially in terms of the economic relations that they're going to have, the political terms that they're going to have with the European Union. That is something that is going to be debatable. So this becomes important because Brexit is an anti-globalization move. So if you have to draw an analysis upon the anti-globalization trends, so you can, or the aftermath of anti-globalization activities, you can conclude that it is not a one step to go in for anti-globalization, rather a complex phenomenon. Like in the case of UK, despite their decision to go in for Brexit, drawing terms with European Union has become challenging for the entire polity of UK. So anti-globalization is not an easy task in itself as it is being made. So this is one analysis that can be drawn from this article. The third issue is that of the referendum. Like I mentioned earlier also, this decision of Brexit has been taken under a referendum by the people. But the author has drawn a good question in this article where he says that the cult of referendum is prevalent globally now, but the idea is that should it guide or should it override the legislative? Now that is a good debatable issue because the people have voted for Brexit. So that clearly means that people are against the idea of UK being a part of the European Union, but this very idea is being challenged in the Parliament, though not explicitly but implicitly, because these parliamentarians are actually advocating for softer terms of Brexit. So this is the whole picture, that the referendum, should it guide the parliamentarians or should it override their decision? So this is a good point that has been drawn in this article. Now coming next, yes. See, in the context of the WTO, the 11th Ministerial Conference that is being held, that has now concluded, that was conducted in the Buenos Aires in Argentina. The full article on WTO has been made on the 11th of December itself, where I had included all the issues related to WTO and India. So that is a important article, important video. But Coming to the updates, now the issues are that the ministerial conference has been concluded and there has become a deadlock. Now, this deadlock raises questions on the relevance of WTO. It raises questions on the relevance of globalization. What is the point of these international institutions if they are unable to crack any deal and a time and again meeting deadlock? Just digressing a bit, not only the WTO, the Paris climate deal has reached a deadlock. So if time and again these international decisions are going to reach deadlocks, then questions on globalization, serious questions on globalization arise. Another issue is that of multilateralism. This is very, very important. WTO is a stark example of multilateralism. No more is the world guided by the US and its policies or the developed countries. Countries like India, South Africa, China, they have assumed leadership status and leadership roles in the WTO. So this clearly reflects that power centers have diffused, they have diluted, and many other countries have taken up leadership roles. So this is a very, very important article for example for multilateralism, that is the WTO case. Another thing is that a keyword that I want to mention, this was in one of the articles on the business page, where the key statement is that trade is a pillar of development and not the pillar of development. Now, what is important here is the Doha Development Agenda. This I had mentioned yesterday also, and I mentioned it time and again. See, in 2001, the Doha Development Agenda was signed under the WTO, as per which trade was to be decided, trade rules were to be decided in such a way that it takes into consideration the developmental concerns of other developing countries. However, the developed world has now backed out from Doha Development Agenda and they've called it a dead letter word. But India continues its stand that Doha Development Agenda should be fulfilled. So that is one issue. But the idea is that trade definitely does contribute to development, but it is not the only contributing factor for development. This is an argument that has been discussed upon in one of the articles. So I found this keyword important, so I'm mentioning it here. Also, there are some updates with regard to the 11th ministerial meet. Though no agreement has been reached, but there have been discussions to for some agenda for 2019 meet that is going to happen now. The agenda is that to do away with certain subsidies on fisheries to be decided. Right now, some fishery subsidies are there. There are some discussions to be held to do away with the subsidies, but those will be discussed in 2019. But you can know that one amongst the other new issues that I had mentioned yesterday also is fisheries subsidies. So that becomes important. Yeah, another issue that I wanted to, another thing that I had missed in the first video of WTO is that how are decisions in WTO taken? Now you have to understand that 2/3 of the countries in WTO are developing. Now, if decisions were taken by voting, definitely all decisions would have been in the favor of developing countries. So definitely this is not the mechanism, this is not the case. Decisions in WTO is taken by something called consultation mechanism, which is a closed door mechanism. It is not a very democratic process. Also, if any country backs down from a particular decision, then no decision will be reached. So that is one thing. Now, in such a scenario, what becomes important is to understand one opinion, one idea, and that is that all the countries of WTO, there are 164 countries in WTO, and amongst all these 164 countries, all countries are at a different stage of socio-economic development. So striking a consensus between 164 countries at different levels of socio-economic development is something next to impossible. It is a very, very challenging task. And so this scenario justifies the development of regional cooperations amongst countries, like countries who have similar socio-economic developmental strategies and needs can collaborate, and they can form regional groups to to achieve common goals. So this is one idea that I wanted to share with you. With this, we finish today's discussion. I thank you all for watching this video. I hope you'll recommend it to your friends, and we shall be welcoming your reviews, comments, and feedback on this video. Hope to see you all tomorrow again. Thank you.